So for companies out there that have a product that's innovative and they're investing in innovation, it's definitely a market to eye.
Absolutely. And, it's the US is a large market. You could always start with a pilot program and
Hmm.
test your way into growing into the market. So you risk mitigate, another popular theme of our conversation here, in order to kind of test the market. So, choose a market, choose a target audience, and you can do a pilot campaign and learn from that.
Welcome back to the Value Driven Marketing Podcast. I am your host, Elena, and in this episode, we are continuing the series of what it takes to break into one of the most competitive and opportunity rich markets in the world, the United States, with a specific focus on the West Coast. And to guide us through it, we're joined by Ted Kohnen, CEO and co founder of Park and Battery, an Adweek's Agency of the Year winner, redefining how creativity, data, and resilience drive growth. TED helps brands turn intelligence into impact and build teams that thrive with purpose and performance. Park and Battery is Adweek's 2024 B2B Agency of the Year, as well as the Association of National Advertisers Agency of the Year for 3 years running. In our conversation, we unpack what European companies need to know before expanding into the US, and here are three ideas you'll hear us explore. First, why meaningful connections matters and how emotional intelligence shapes business interactions in the States. Second, why research can be one of the best competitive advantages. And third, how to adapt your message and positioning for the American market because what works in Europe very rarely lands the same way in America. I think this episode is full of practical insights, real examples, and perspectives. So let's get into it. Hey, Ted, good morning. Welcome to the Value Driven Marketing Podcast. Very excited to have you today on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to get into the conversation.
Excited as well, and very, very interesting to learn that you are familiar with Romania and Bucharest. So it's a small world, I guess we can say that.
Absolutely. I've lived and traveled all around the world, but I've gotten to spend wonderful time in Romania, both in Bucharest and Brasov, and absolutely love the people.
Good to hear. Ted, I would love to know more about Park and Battery, and as well for maybe people in our audience that are not familiar with your agency. Can you tell me more? What do you guys do? Who do you help?
Absolutely. So Park and Battery is a full service agency. So we work with brands on brand strategy, their positioning, their messaging, and then manifesting that in terms of creative and how it activates in the market. So all through media, media strategy, go to market, creative content, etc. We work with brands all over the world. We work with large Fortune 500 companies, and we, being in the California Bay Area, we work with a lot of startup brands as well.
Mm-hmm.
Series A, B, C funded brands. So hyperscale brands. We work with Meta, so formerly Facebook, particularly the virtual reality labs. We work with Universal Music. We work with Avis Budget Rental Cars, all in B2B, B2C capacity. We work with one of the largest health insurance plans in the country, Kaiser Permanente. So, you can see we work across a lot of different industries,
Mm-hmm.
and we love that variety. And we also work with one of the world's largest biotech companies, Thermo Fisher Scientific, and we work with their group in Europe, in Asia, in the US, as well as South America.
Mm-hmm. So you really have a global footprint.
A global footprint, absolutely.
Okay. So that segues very well into our conversation of expanding to the US, maybe more specifically, trying to expand in the West Coast, because of course
Mm.
it's a huge market and one would imagine companies would try to segment. And so I would start with the more, let's say, softer aspects of what it takes to make it into the US and into the West Coast. And I will try and start with communication styles. So
Mhm.
how is that different, especially since you have the experience of working, of course, with many countries and Romania being one of them. So what is the preferred communication styles and how does that translate into a business setting?
Absolutely. I think, well, first, it's important to remember the vast diversity of the US.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, people in Los Angeles and people in San Francisco will say they're very different, right? So even within a state like California, which is large, California has the fourth largest economy in the world just by itself. So there's a lot of diversity even within this state. Um, I would say, the best practices in terms of communication styles is it, it more universally is that people want to be heard, they want to feel
Mm-hmm.
heard. So when you're in conversations with them, I'll give you an example. If you're going to meet with a prospective client and you're going to give a presentation, don't jump right into the presentation. Have a conversation, get to know people, get to know their needs, their wants, their sensibilities, what motivates them, what fears they have. If you can connect on the emotional level and not
Mm-hmm.
just the rational level, then all the future conversations are going to be a lot more fruitful. So definitely that kind of conversation style. Don't rush it, especially on the West Coast. Um, you know, there's the perception that we're more laid back, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
we are a little bit, no less serious at all. But not rushing into the conversation, not rushing into the presentation, will really set the foundation for a strong relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so good to know that. I was actually living with the impression that it's the other way around, that people are just very business focused and let's get the deal done, uh, move quickly. So I was on the opposite spectrum. So
I
very good.
think, yeah. Sorry, Lena, but that's a good observation because I do believe so. I come from New York City, so
Mm-hmm.
I have the perspective of growing up, living, and working in New York City, and now living and working in the San Francisco Bay Area. And it's definitely different in New York. It's a
Mm-hmm.
little more, um, it's a little more quicker, a little more intense in terms of that. Let's have the conversation. Let's get the deal done, but there's still that connection, that personal connection that needs to happen in order to make the relationship strong, future conversations, just much more impactful. But yes, different areas of the country have a different level of intensity, I will say.
Mm-hmm. Okay, okay. So do spend time in, getting to know the other person. And in terms of business etiquette, outside of, show interest in the
Mhm.
person standing in front of you, what would you add? What's important to know?
Um, I think a couple of things. I think one universal thing to know is always go in knowing who you're meeting with, what their company is. Do as much research as you can.
Mm-hmm.
Clients, prospective clients love it when you have a knowledge of their business. They're not expecting you to be expert in their business, but coming with a knowledge of their business, their market, their competitors, also is just great from establishing a strong business foundation perspective. I think personally, there are some conversations to avoid
Mm-hmm.
anywhere in the US. I would avoid political conversations.
Okay.
Um, I think politics in the US has become very emotional. I
Mm,
think people get judged simply by their political affiliation. So you really kind of want to stay away from those divisive topics um, that could just, set you off on the wrong foot. So I would definitely avoid politics. Um, Sports are always good topics to connect on, um,
okay.
for sure. Um, I have found also in my conversations with individuals, our clients here in the U.S., particularly on the West Coast, individuals love to talk about their families, right?
Mm-hmm.
They love to share about their kids' activities and what their holiday plans are, and so it's a great way again to connect with that person. But yeah, there still are definitely things that I would stay away from, like politics. Um, yeah, that's typically the hot button right now.
I was wondering, in terms of making decision and what is the preferred decision making style,
Mhm.
what would you say is typical for the US and typical, more specifically, for the West Coast? Is it more of a collaborative style? Is it more leader driven?
From our experience, it's more collaboratively driven. So
Mm-hmm.
anytime that we're going through a pitch process, there's you know 5, 10, 15 stakeholders in the room, right? And
Okay.
oftentimes they're communicating to stakeholders not in the room. So there's a lot of communal decision making going on, which means you have to be very patient because
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I've noticed is decision making takes longer now than it ever has been. I've been at this 25 plus years, and the decisions on, to choose an agency partner or to even sign off on a project, um, are the slowest that I've ever seen in my entire career. So patience is an incredibly important thing. Being prepared to go many rounds on questions and answers um,
Mm-hmm.
is going to be important. And then, from an agency's perspective, understanding, okay, we have a lot of support here, but where are the blockers, right? And how can we help alleviate those questions or those challenges that individuals might have to something that we want to do or something that we're proposing or even going with Park and Battery? So it's definitely decision by committee. There
Mm-hmm.
may be, there's definitely seniority within that committee, but it's decision by committee, and patience will serve you well, very well.
And I guess communicating well and probably over communicating, since there are so many people in that decision making unit, that you have to align, understand each perspective and their
Right.
priorities, and then communicating with each of them and trying to get everyone on board, I guess. And I'm just wondering, what do you think is the cause for the decisions taking longer now than they have 10 years ago, for example?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've thought about that a lot. I think it's a few things. I think one, it's just the uncertainty in
Mm-hmm.
markets, global uncertainty, political uncertainty, and that's been going on for many, many years, right? Um, we had the 2001 bubble, we had the 2008 global economic crash, financial markets crash, housing crash. We've had these major events happening more frequently, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a lot of uncertainty. Um, you know, do we go for it, right? And so there's uncertainty. I also think uh, there's a lower risk tolerance nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
People, decision makers, groups are afraid to make the final decision and say, "Let's go." Now, not everyone, not every company, but kind of at a macro level, I think there's more risk mitigation that's going on than there ever has been. And I also think it's because the decision making committees have gotten larger. It's just now inherently a slower process. And I think, you know, the title of your podcast is perfect, value driven marketing, because with each one of those individuals that's part of the decision making committee, they got to see what value is for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for us, that's a lot of people to talk to, right? And sometimes it's harder to convince individuals of the value to them of
Yeah.
doing something, making a certain decision, etc. So, that's a few of the major factors I think in why it's been going slower over the years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when you mention uncertainty, you also mentioned risk.
Mhm.
My question is, when it comes to risk, and being risk adverse, I guess.
Mhm.
Where do you think you stand, and where do businesses stand in? Are there, more risk adverse these days? Is it something that's specific to your region that also impacts making business with outside and external partners?
Uh, I think for Park and Battery as an agency, we love risk. We'll take it.
Mhm.
We don't do anything foolishly. I like to
Okay.
believe that, but we go for it. Whether it's we're recommending how a brand goes to market or a certain campaign, um, because you need to take risks. There's so
Mm-hmm.
much commoditization in the US and in the world that you've got to break through. So we're all about risk taking. I think larger publicly traded companies that have stockholders are more risk adverse than the Series B, Series C funded startup companies that we see a lot of in the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
they're like, we'll try this. Oh, it didn't work. Okay, we learned from it. We'll try this. And there's a lot of kind of test and roll methodology for how they go to market. Um, so, yeah, I think it depends on the industry. I think tech is a little less risk adverse just because of the culture of tech. I think
Mm-hmm.
financial
Mm-hmm.
services is incredibly risk adverse. Um, I
As they
think
should, in a way.
they should be. The healthcare industry, despite a lot of innovation that's happening from a technology perspective in healthcare, I think they're risk adverse as well. And certainly, you know, the legal system drives that. Like in Europe, you have GDPR,
Mm-hmm.
we have
Mm-hmm.
similar laws here in the US, both on the healthcare side, on the data technology side. So, nobody wants to get in trouble with the law. So,
Yeah, that's for
um,
sure.
and the industries that are more high compliance industries like financial
Mm-hmm.
services, healthcare, government, they're always going to be a little bit more risk adverse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I guess in terms of mitigating that risk, how would you advise a business owner to think of potentially approaching a potential client, potential partner in an industry that's risk adverse, that's highly regulated? Would you have some experience to share?
Absolutely. We're absolutely always pushing our clients, regardless of the
Mm.
industry. I think
Okay.
one of the ways that we help risk mitigate is from early on in the process, we'll bring legal into it, right? So whether it's our
Mm-hmm.
client's legal department or outside legal experts, so that our client has confidence that yes, what we're doing is compliant with what the laws are, what the regulations are. Um, Also, because we have a very strong strategic planning process and a very strong research group, we'll do a lot of research to kind of help risk mitigate in terms of if we launch this, what do we predict the response is going to be in market, right? So there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of data that we're gathering, a lot of research that we're doing before, even sometimes before we recommend anything. Again, to help risk mitigate. Um, any potential concerns that the client might have. So bringing legal into the process early, um, you know, greater upfront discovery, really
Mm-hmm.
helps to risk mitigate the process.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I guess from the perspective of a business owner, they should have that in mind that maybe they need to engage legal help that's based in the US, of course,
Mhm.
and engage someone to help them with the research and spend time doing that research. So not jump straight into let's go.
Oh, right, exactly. So,
Mm-hmm,
if you're a European company, and let's say you've got a great technology product in the healthcare space, and you want to break into the US market, which is a big healthcare market, a lot of patients, a lot of healthcare companies, a lot of hospitals. You know, Identifying a legal resource is probably step number one.
mm-hmm,
And then, you know, s- there's a lot of research out there that's being done every day. So starting to read up on the research to understand product market fit, I think that's an important aspect. So you may
mm-hmm,
say, we have a great product and you have a big market. You still need to look at the product market fit, and doing your own research will help get you that, as well as looking at any of the research that's been done recently will also help we'll also help a brand from Europe coming to the U.S. make sure that they start off on the right foot in the market.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes total sense. So when
Mhm.
it comes to doing your research, how would you advise a company to go about that? Should they do it on their own? Should they enlist help? And then what are the different sources where they could go and find research data, company data, different things like that?
Yeah, excellent question. So I think one of the best places to go for research that's already been done
Mm-hmm.
is the publishers.
Okay.
So we have a lot of industry trade publications in the U.S. across a lot of different sectors. They're great resources for research. They're typically always doing their own research, and you can partner with them to do research specific for what you're looking for about your product, et cetera. So they're already tapped into the market. They have a pulse of the market. They understand all the nuances because they have the readership.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and those are the people that the company would be targeting. So going to the publishers, the trade publications is a great place to go. Um, Also doing um, qualitative interviews. So
Mm-hmm.
doing one-on-one interviews with different segments of the population to get a sense of, again, product market fit, risks to be aware of, and also get a sense of emotion and tonality. So sometimes it's not what someone says, but how they say it. And in doing the qualitative interviews, you can really get a sense of, oh, there's a lot of excitement around my product, or there's not. Or this feature is great for the US market or this part of the US market, but this feature on the product may not be. So you get a lot of good feedback that way from doing one-on-one interviews or focus groups.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And would you say that Americans are open to being, let's say, approached with just a cold message like I approach you, hey, let's have a chat? Would that be a good idea?
Oh, good question. I think it depends on the industry. In some industries, and specifically in healthcare, biotech, it's customary to offer an honorarium, a
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
$250 fee for their time, right? Which is called an honor, which we call an honorarium. And there are some markets where people just like to give their opinion, and they're happy to give their opinion. It's if it's a product they're familiar with, or a service they're familiar with, typically they're happy just to speak and, you know, tell you what they like or don't like about a product or a service. But again, in some sectors, if it's a new product, offering an honorarium will typically get individuals to have the conversation with you.
mm-hmm. Okay, that's super good to know. So that's new info to me, and I think to the audience as well. And I'm thinking, okay, so you've done your research. Let's say you know what you have to do. Uh, then actually going to market, would you say are specific channels that you will recommend? I know this is a very contextual answer, and I know it does depend. But would you say there are some channels that do work better? So, for example, cold calling someone on the telephone, uh, yeah, what other, is that a good idea or not, and what better channels would there
Sure.
be?
Sure. When we're when we're looking at the optimal go-to-market mix or media mix
Mm-hmm,
for our
mm-hmm,
clients, we'll do a audience media consumption analysis to look at what are the best channels, because oftentimes brands have a limited budget and they need to
mm-hmm,
know what channels are going to be the most effective, and that's where they should put their budget. Um, so we do this across all our sectors, the clients that we work with, and I would say, you know, there are some channels that absolutely are always present. Social media, particularly LinkedIn, is always present. And for B2B brands, what we see actually rising more in terms of interest and usage, even in a B2B context, Instagram, TikTok. So it's not just LinkedIn, which is,
mm-hmm,
you know, at its core B2B, but also Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. They are becoming incredibly effective B2B channels. So always see social media,
mm-hmm,
certain search. hasn't gone anywhere. Paid search, that hasn't gone anywhere. But what I would say is AI. So ChatGPT, we
Mm-hmm.
find that actually prospects, customers are going to ChatGPT more and using that as their search engine than Google. But
Mm-hmm.
still, being found either on a search engine or through ChatGPT is incredibly important. And um, I think what's old is new again. So TV is incredibly powerful, whether it's B2B or B2C, but streaming TV. So what you would see on, the ads you would see on YouTube TV or in the States, Hulu or Roku or those type of streaming platforms, incredibly effective because you can be hyper targeted to your.
Mm-hmm.
We do a lot of streaming TV with our clients. Audio is also incredibly effective, but not radio, drive time radio like used to be, but Spotify, for example. Great channel for our audiences. And in some areas, out of home has been
Mm-hmm.
incredibly effective. But we like to use digital out of home so we can change messages. There's not a large upfront cost with digital out of home. So what's old is new again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Radio outdoor have been around for decades and decades and decades, maybe even centuries. Well, yeah, in some regards, outdoor for sure. But it's the new formats, it's the new way of targeting, it's the new way of serving up your campaign that makes it incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And TV is not going away. And when it comes to ChatGPT, I can say the same for Romania that people do search on ChatGPT more often and they reach us. So definitely a channel that you don't want to
It,
overlook and say, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. It's a global phenomenon. I was going to say in the Bay Area. So the one of the famous highways in California is the 101. Um,
Mm-hmm.
And if you go from the city of San Francisco to San Francisco Airport, so it's probably about 10, 15 miles, and you look at the billboards, and there's lots of billboards as you go down. I would say 98% of them, maybe 99% of them, are all B2B billboards.
Okay.
All, there's no consumer. It's all B2B because there's a big biotech corridor. There's a big tech corridor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's fascinating. It's probably the only place in the world where I've seen that level, that cluster of advertising that is only B2B. It's fascinating. If you drive it, it's fascinating drive because you know, I'll be driving with my wife, and she's a she's a book publisher, so she's not in the B2B space, so she doesn't, she's asking me what all these billboards mean, right? If you know, you know. And in this area, it's very much about B2B, and if you know, you know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think it's so interesting to learn that B2B companies are realizing the importance of branding because some years ago it was, or at least in my perception, in my region, it was a lot about digital and digital campaigns, which were super measurable. But I think it was a lot about short term tactics and digital and attracting quick results. Branding was something very fancy, but it's for the bougies, not for B2B or things like that. So yeah, yeah, quite an interesting turn of events. I was wondering, in terms of making a decision, choosing suppliers, which would be the, let's say, two, three aspects or things that could make or break a deal? Because I think that's something a lot of companies or business owners have in mind. Like, what should I pay attention to?
Um, uh, Chemistry is very important in making a deal. So the
Mm-hmm.
relationship, I see more brands putting an emphasis on that. So it doesn't matter where in the world you are. Um, People are now, U.S. companies definitely are focused on chemistry with their vendor, with their partner. Um, and this might sound obvious, but transparency is
Mm-hmm.
incredibly important, particularly if you're a company that's providing a data service. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Transparency around data is incredibly important. Um, Also, visibility into who the company would be working with. So who are my account people? Who's on my team, right? And making sure those people stay involved in the process, right? And they just don't disappear. That's very important. Uh, I think U.S. companies, U.S. companies are absolutely very willing to work with companies outside the U.S. for sure. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we have a client in the financial services space, a bank, um, and they use an agency out of the Ukraine, and they love them. Great relationship. They're on the technology side.
Mm-hmm.
Great relationship. Super communicative. They do great work. So yeah, there are lots of services coming out of India and other European and obviously India is not in Europe, but out of India, Australia, the European Union as well. So yeah, we've started to build up our presence in the UK actually, so and throughout Europe. But yeah, I think transparency is a big thing. Who you're working with, if you're taking somebody's data, how are you using that data? How is that data stored? That's going to be incredibly important. Uh, yeah, those are critical. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, and
Okay.
also, I think one of the other things, and this could make or break a deal, is companies want to know about your culture. So if you're
Okay.
offering a product or service, they want to know about your culture. What are your values?
Mm-hmm.
How do you support sustainability, the environment? How are you using ethical practices in your business? That's very important. That's very important these days. And that aligns with our values. And one of the reasons that we became a certified B Corporation as well, which was very important to us and has actually become very important to clients that work with us. They like that we're a B Corp now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And for the European audience that's maybe not
Oh, B Corp.
familiar with Corp, if you
So
can expand.
yeah, so the B Corporation is a global certification, which is basically and it's a very long process to get B Corp certified. I think it took us a year and a half. But you have certain commitments to running a sustainable business, an environmentally friendly business, to supporting underserved populations.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really it's becoming a what we call a public good corporation, right? We're helping society.
Okay, okay, very, very interesting. So yeah, I've noticed the accreditation, but I should, yeah, just
Right.
wanted to know more. So we've talked about channels, we talked about doing research. I'm also interested in learning if you think or how should a company think about adapting their positioning and their messaging coming to the States. So
Mm.
what would you advise a company trying to expand into the States? How should they treat their positioning and messaging?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I have an example around this. So when I was working on TCS, so that's Tata Consultancy Services. So we all know Tata, they're the big
Mm-hmm.
out of India, and they had a product, a service for finance and accounting that they wanted to make a big push on in the U.S. They had to adapt their positioning because of the sensitivity around publicly traded companies taking their data and moving it outside the organization, right?
Uh-huh.
So when we're talking about publicly traded companies, multi-billion-dollar companies, from a finance and accounting perspective, that's typically all internal, so that there's security around that data, right? There are controls around that data. There's a there was a large concern around, oh, you're telling me now you can do this service, but I have to move my data outside my organization. So that
Mm-hmm.
was a fear that they had to overcome. Now, certainly the service, the value, that didn't change in terms of what they offered. So in order to do that, there was a lot of communications that took place, a lot of content that got creative that talked about the safety and security, even moving it outside your organization, how data is handled, the current companies that are actually using this service, large multinational organizations that are already using the service of TCS. So there was a lot more education that had to go in order to overcome the concern, the inertia about using a specific finance and accounting service through TCS. So it's not necessarily changing your positioning, but like you said, it's adapting, or what we say, dimensionalizing your positioning.
Mm.
Um, and it might be, yeah. I think the research will tell you, oh, do I need to adapt my positioning? Do I need to evolve it? Do I need to highlight some features more than others? Um, does my positioning that I use in Europe or elsewhere outside the US, I'm coming to the US, does it sound like a US competitor? Right. And I need to adapt it from there. So the research is really going to help direct any company in terms of what they need to do from the positioning. And I think what I just said is an important point. You always want to look at, is your positioning similar or just the same as maybe some other company in the US,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
you want to avoid that. You want to break through the noise. You want to break through the sea of sameness that sometimes can very much exist in the US market. There are some sectors, some markets where it's flooded. It is saturated with companies. And if you want to break into it, you have to break in and break through for sure.
And I guess you've also answered another question that I had in mind, which was of a company that has successfully expanded into the US. So you've already mentioned
I don't
TCS.
know.
Is there any?
Yeah, I'll give you
Uh,
another example because I think it talks to the diversity of the US.
mhm.
Um, IKEA, not a US company,
Definitely.
but has been enormously successful in the US market. If you see an IKEA in New York City versus an IKEA out in the suburbs, you're going to notice they're very different. So in New York City, the IKEA in New York City, um, they're selling smaller versions of furniture. They're not selling big sets, right? Because New York
Mm.
City apartments, right? New York City has certain laws around um, you know, what you can install in your apartments for, fire safety reasons, right? So IKEA had to adapt their store to the local market, to the needs of the local market, to the laws of the local market. So there are things you'll find in a New York City store that you won't find in a store that's more in the suburban area. You go to a suburban store and it's gigantic, it's massive. You walk through it, it could take you hours, right? New York City store built for efficiency and speed. So they knew when they came to the different markets that the store experience had to be different. Not only did the products have to be
Mhm.
different, but the experience had to be different. And I think that's what's so important for any company outside the US trying to break into the US market. There's the product market fit, and then there's the overall experience that they have with your brand, right? How do they experience you from a content perspective, from a communications perspective? That experience, it's what's going to connect you to the audience in a more meaningful way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So good learnings from IKEA for sure. And I think customer experience. I think that's something we can learn from the US. I feel like no one does it better than you. I mean, that's my, of course, subjective perspective, but that's how I feel about it. So okay, thank you for sharing those examples. I'm wondering if you were to wrap up and give one final piece of advice to a business owner, a company, European, let's say, that's looking to make it into the US, what should they pay attention to?
Uh, they should pay attention to shifting dynamics. And I think this is where the research is so important. Don't look at old research.
Mm-hmm.
COVID had a major impact on uh, geographical dynamics here. So the work from home, um, kind of philosophy that companies have Yeah, there are some companies, but not a lot that have a return to office. But, you know, while the company may be in a city, right? The people that you're communicating with may be outside the city. So, because they're going to work from home. Really understand those dynamics and understand where your audience is, not just who they are, not just this title or this function within the company, but where are they geographically? Are they sitting with people that they talk with every day, or are they more out in their own in their home or working from a remote space? I think that's going to be really important. So, if you send a dimensional mailer, big box to the office to somebody, but they work from home, well, then you miss that person. So, understanding that dynamic is going to help choose the channels, choose the tactics, in order to effectively enter the market or get to those audiences you're trying to communicate with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, noted. And I've heard the research so many times. That is definitely, I guess, one of the keywords of our
Definitely.
conversation today. Ted, this has been super insightful. Thank you for putting things in context. Do you feel there's something you would want to add and I haven't asked you?
No, the questions have been quite comprehensive. Thank you very much. I think one thing I would say for anyone outside the U.S. looking to break in, there's still tremendous opportunity. The U.S.
Mm-hmm.
market in general, whether it's B2B or B2C, the audiences, the companies, they're looking for new. They're looking for breakthrough innovation. So while there are a lot of companies here, a lot of US grown companies here, um, the collective we in the US, we're seeking inspiration and innovation from anywhere. And I don't think there's ever been a better time to break into the US market.
Mm-hmm. So for companies out there that have a product that's innovative and they're investing in innovation, it's definitely a market to eye.
Absolutely. And, it's the US is a large market. You could always start with a pilot program and
Mm-hmm.
test your way into growing into the market. So you risk mitigate, another popular theme of our conversation here, in order to kind of test the market. So, choose a market, choose a target audience, and you can do a pilot campaign and learn from that.
Makes total sense. Thank you so much, Ted. This has been a pleasure.